Hey, what's up everyone? So today we are literally on a Saturday market breakdown, and there has been a huge amount of momentum in the markets right now, which is really nice. So essentially just looking at different pairs to see the variations of what could happen now. Starting with the weekly, we can see that with a lot of these pairs, and I'll just quickly flick through them. You can see that we have some momentum across the board on a lot of these pairs. What we may be seeing now is that price is going to go into its run off momentum. We're already seeing a slight insight of the momentum kicking off now, so there's an abundance of opportunity to follow, and we're basically just going to see how we can capitalize on those pairs. It doesn't mean that necessarily everything is going to go and that now has to be the moment, but because we're seeing across the board momentum kicking in, it's likely that we may actually see some really good follow throughs and potentially a start of an impulsive leg across quite a few of these pairs. So let's jump straight into the DXY. So what we can see on the DXY is that we have been correctively squeezing to the upside, and then we tapped into this key area here, and now we've had a pretty strong impulsive push to the upside. The question is, are we going to continue with this momentum, because there's more than enough here for this to continue moving higher? So we now need to evaluate, if price is going to go higher, how can we get involved? Going into the daily on the DXY, we can then see that even though we floored off over here, there is still potential for this to still come back down, because it has been kind of up and down, but this has done more than enough. When you really do isolate this bit of price action, you can see that we've had the corrective push, and now we're just pushing to the upside. The great thing about this is we can now just wait patiently for a continuation pattern, and if we get the continuation pattern, we can look to go long. So that's essentially what I'm looking for. We are in a run of momentum, so we don't necessarily need to have these large structures in play, but it would basically be a lot better if we did have something like that. Now, looking at this variation on the 1 hour of the continuation pattern to the upside, it is slightly larger and it doesn't have to form like this, so we'll have to evaluate it throughout the week as price develops. But I will be looking for something like this to formulate over Monday, and then potentially by Tuesday morning we may have an entry in there. So something that I'm just going to be keeping a close eye and attention towards, because really and truly there's a huge amount of opportunity across the board, and we just don't want to sleep on it. But at the same time, we don't want to just take a position based upon impulsive price action, because we are still coming from this area, right? So this isn't the strongest point where price can just reverse, but we have tapped into it and started to reverse. So we need to see if we can get clear continuation, deliberate price action to move higher, and then basically use that on related and counter related pairs to the DXY. With the US 500, essentially we can see that it is just notoriously strong for bulls. We are just pushing with continuation to the upside, and I think in terms of impulse correction continuation, we're just moving to the upside. So on a strategic point of view, there is potentials for good longs in here. There was a long position in there as well. It's just one of those ones where you have to understand the territory that you're trading in when it comes to certain pairs. This is one pair that tends to just break all-time highs and keeps going, and then eventually we get strong dips and then we come back. And I think right now we are in that impulse correction continuation phase, and yeah, you can take full advantage of stuff like this. If this does come in to give an entry, we'll be there, but more than likely the clear entries were probably around about here, and you could have just taken that with stops down here, and then you'd be holding for around about 0.84, but you'd be positioned really well for that, and then you'd be playing the larger move. Now, sometimes slow is fast, and it just requires a large amount of patience and holding, where I think with a lot of people, they don't have that patience. So what happens is they get into the market, it then does this, and they're not willing to hold it, and then what could have happened is from here to here they could have made something like 8, 9, 10%, but in reality they end up walking away with like 2 or 3 because they just don't have the patience. So something to just bear in mind when you are taking positions for longs, but also at the same time we are trading in higher all-time high territory. So it's one of those ones where you need to be on the game and on your management with these, because you don't want to just be in the market and then suddenly the market dips on you and that's where most of the fear comes in when you are taking trades like this. But just understand what type of pair this is. If you study it well enough, you can see that even if you took this continuation into that high, you would have then been pushing for all-time highs here. And if you were just too aggressive thinking that the market was going to drop at any point, you would have missed out on all of this potential here. So likewise with these sort of areas here, this just has huge amount of upside potential, and I'd keep that in mind when you are looking at these pairs. With JP225, it is still a little bit in that area where we just need to see solid commitment. I don't think this is the typical type of pair that I'm going to be trading just yet. Now, some of the Japanese related pairs are in very valuable areas, and we could see a massive reversal coming into play. Whereas, you know, something like that happened, we wouldn't be surprised. But then just understand that in the long term, the Japanese pairs have been very bullish, and this could just formulate into something like that. And then for some reason, you know, it just takes its way back up, and I wouldn't be surprised if something like that did formulate over time, but it's too early to speculate on that. What we need to really look at is, okay, well, we have the all-time high here, we have this bit as the low, this is the range, and essentially we're in there. So where are we within range? We're in the middle. And is this really where we have a solid edge? Not really. Can we play A to B movements within here? Yeah, we could, but at the same time, is, you know, what territory of risk does that come with, and is that where I really want to be placing my capital, especially when we have so many great pairs on watch? So JP225 is always just one that I have on my watch list, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to trade it week on week. The JP225 doesn't look like something I am going to be trading this week, so just wanted to kind of give you that oversight of this as well. With the Euro Yen, now this is what I was talking about, where it's in such a valuable area, but it doesn't necessarily have to move. You can see that we've sat in this for a couple weeks, and the nice thing about it is we do have this 1, 2, 3 massive equal spacing, really nice structure into this area. The cool thing about it is we broke above, we pushed in, and then we correctively came back in. Now we haven't completely filled the wick, but it's not entirely necessary. We can still sell off from here and get a really nice movement, and we're really high up in the run. So trades over here for the short are really highly profitable if they do commit through, and we do get a follow through with it, but we just have to be on the A game. And it's one of those ones where if you do get positioned to trade, you wouldn't want to be too aggressive with it because of where you're trading and what you could be trading into. So I would be mindful of this little point here, but there's enough room to manage into here to here if you do get it. This has been corrective on the push down and still can go higher, because we are seeing some other yen pairs looking like they are going long. But just to be trading what we're seeing on the high time frame, I will be looking for shorts. I think it's more strategic and better, but if you did want to lower the risk, you'd ideally wait for that line to be broken, a solid push through, continuation down here, and that would lower your risk, and you could basically trade that into this low here and you'd be good to go. So that's basically what I'm looking at for EJ. If this doesn't shape up and it does push through and continuation there, it's even better for me, but I wouldn't hesitate if a trade shapes up here. With EuroCAD is looking absolutely nice. There were some trades in here as well, but what I'm looking at for this week is essentially we have this area over here. We've basically been hovering in this area. We're failing to commit to the upside. It's just basically corrective, so we are trading within this massive correction. However, if we do get something deliberate where I can basically take a trade into here to this low, and then if it does follow through, great. If it doesn't, well then, you know, at least I capitalize on a little bit of that. And yeah, basically I'm looking for something like this. Now, it doesn't necessarily always mean that we're going to get something large like that. In fact, something larger would make sense around about here, but I will still be looking for trades within this area, because right now we are in a very solid run to the downside, especially from the daily perspective. You can see that what's actually happened here is that we've broken above, we pushed, we failed to commit, correctively came up, we created this sort of range, we came in for a 1, 2, 3 to the high, we rejected, and now we're pushing to the downside. Could we still come in for a third touch to the bottom of this range? It is possible, and I think for that case, if we have that solid momentum coming in and we're pushing to the downside, you still would want to look to get positioned on a short here, even into these lows, because the odds are if we do break through this, because of where we're positioned on the higher time frame, this could really open the floodgates for it to go to the downside. With Aussie US dollar, I am essentially looking at this as a very corrective, expanding, but more so what we can see over here on the weekly is that we are failing to push higher, right? And I think these wicks are a really good indication that we actually would be likely to push to the downside. So when I go over to the daily, what I can see here is similar to Aussie CAD, we are within this corrective range. However, to lower the risk, you would really look for all of this area to be broken, like a solid push through continuation down here to really trade to the bottom of this. But I think more than likely, because we're in this sort of corrective run, there's so many trades within here that you'd want to just really understand how price is moving. And what you can see over here is that, you know, there's this, there's that, there's this, and then you've got also this little bit of price, and then this is its own. So that comes into a level of pattern separation. And when you separate this pattern, it makes a lot of sense to be seeing something in this with a little bit more weight, but then with enough momentum to kick into these lows, with enough room to manage from here to here. And then if we do break through that, we go to the next point. So that's basically how I am looking at it for Aussie US dollar. But Aussie US dollar is looking absolutely stunning, and I would just really be sharp for this, because right now there's just a huge amount of potential on the board across these pairs. The next one I'm looking at is the Germany 40, so the DAX. This one is also quite interesting. Now, it does correlate quite well with the S&P 500. However, sometimes they don't correlate, and in this case they're not correlating. And what we're seeing is that price has been overextended massively, and even if this is creating something, it's likely to be something like an expanding. It doesn't look like your typical running channel neither. So what I am seeing here is that price came to this area and was very indecisive, and now it's made its decision up and is pushing to the downside, which is clear. We're looking for deliberate price action. Now, there was a slight mistrade here for myself, which I would have opted into because we cleared that low and it was a part of what I was looking for, but because I didn't have it on watch and I wasn't paying attention to it at the time, I missed it. But what we're looking for now is the next deliberate price action continuation, and I'm looking for something here, hopefully something a little bit more weighted. It would be visible on the 4 but much more clear on the 1, and then essentially be looking to get involved for a risk entry here. In terms of protection, I think it would be fairly easy if we have structure. If not, we may actually just have to look for a retrace or something like that, where we can actually just see that price is actually deliberately acting within accordance to this structure here. 2 bottoms, 2 tops, and then essentially see how we approach it. With USD Yen, likewise, I'm actually looking at a similar sort of thesis to what I'm seeing on EJ, but mainly because if we're seeing the DXY move higher, then we could potentially see USD Yen move higher as well. But just to kind of keep that on a mixed sort of level, I just want to be patient with this and see how it develops. This was the point of sale. We came in correctively. There's this potential for this 1, 2, 3, however you want to look at it, doesn't really matter at this point. But what we need to see is, are we going to push up higher, complete, and then probably just extend, tap into these areas and then sell? That area is in correlation with the weekly area, which I'll just zoom out and show you. This point here, and we are very close to it, but it's not necessarily always the case that we have to fill those little gaps. Like, we've done more than enough. We can still sell off a bit before we come in and fill it. So I just want to see how this develops and if there's continuation in it. This is much higher risk, in all honesty. Something like this can easily tag you in, tag you out, get very complex. You are trading within this corrective channel here, but more than likely, I do really like how structure has really showed itself. You're basically looking at it like this, and I'm just looking to isolate it for what it is. It's basically just a corrective squeeze higher, taps into the override, rejects, and now I'm looking for continuation to go short. This one can easily just push higher, like I said, so if it does, then I could easily be removing that. So it's more of a kind of like a wild card soft watch additional pair, but it's not my typical go-to setup right now. I just need to really see how price formulates, and if I get something deliberate, so be it. New Zealand US dollar, this one is also looking phenomenal. So I did happen to catch an 6% trade in here, or 4%, 6 or 4%, I can't remember at this point, but we tapped into this value area, we scooped in, we tapped in, we rejected, and then in in accordance with DXY and the other US related pairs, we were then seeing continuations to the downside. So this was looking phenomenal, absolutely stunning. And now I'm just looking for another continuation pattern to go lower. Now we are in a run of momentum, and we may not see something so clean and so clear and large like this. We may just see, taps into this area, sells, and then just doesn't come back up for it. It is what it is, but I am going to be looking for something a little bit more weighted, just because it kind of works more in accordance with the other US related pairs, and then basically looking for an entry in these areas. So that's kind of it really, and then it does happen to just retest off the back of that as well. It's just an additional little piece of information there, but that's what I'm looking for, and then to trade into those areas. It's not typical for me to have a lot of Swiss pairs on, but right now I do have GBP Swiss and New Zealand Swiss. Now, the main reason being for it is if you go over to the daily or the weekly, what you'll tend to see is that has price technically done enough to promote a sell? In my opinion, there's so many points to the left, it's completely fine, but what we can see here is that we are really rejecting to the downside, and we're respecting a level off the typical Swiss structure. So despite this not looking the best, if you did pattern separate and decipher it, it does make sense. I am looking at this now, breaking this low, creating continuation through the low, and then just to basically manage it semi-aggressive, more on the looser side, but then to see how this formulates. And if we can take a trade and we actually make our way all the way down here, then this turns into a phenomenal trade. In terms of stop protection, the reason why I like New Zealand Swiss is because you can actually get a little bit more tighter than most. If I was to get into a position there for any reason, then even if I was going to this low, there's around about 7% trade there. And then even if we start filling this wick over here, there's around about 20% on the table, and you'd be positioned really well in accordance with all of that. So that's essentially how I'm looking at it for New Zealand Swiss. I'm really interested in seeing how this pair develops, and yeah, just going to keep that on the sidelines. New Zealand CAD, likewise, as we're seeing with New Zealand US dollar, New Zealand Swiss, New Zealand CAD could also be selling off really well because we are coming from this level of interest. Now, what we can see over here is that this is actually a corrective middle section, right? And then you basically have all of that. So this is a massive part of accumulation. Now, it is much larger to this, and that has been corrective, but what then we see is then we also have that. So it's a correction into a correction, which would make sense for this to potentially sell to the downside. Now, would be a little bit more cautious on this side because this can still develop and do that and just really get corrective and then tap into these areas. And then next thing you know, we go from there. We did kind of get very close to that as well, which is interesting. So it is a possibility, but more so, I'm not going to let that put me off any trades. I'm actually going to be looking for continuation like this. So we've got to push away. I want to see deliberate continuation and see if we can actually trade into this low as the minimum, and then manage it accordingly. And then if we can push through, it opens up the floodgates. In terms of stop placement, this one is a little bit larger because, well, it's actually not as bad as I thought it was actually, but it's still pretty good. So even to this low, you've got around about 4, 5, and then 8, and then around about 11, and then so forth, and you open up the floodgates. If you are positioned in here, then this could be a really phenomenal run for you, because really and truly, it's something like this that is the fine line difference between just being patient throughout all of this to then take advantage of this area. So that's something to also bear in mind. The New Zealand CAD is looking absolutely stunning. GBP Yen. GBP Yen is also one that I think is worth just keeping on watch as well. Now, I really do like where it's coming from, because on a weekly perspective, you can see that what's really happened is we've had a really impulsive run here. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to get a large pullback straight away, but we've tapped into this area. We are looking like we're reaching for this point, which is the point of sale, but also equally we are at a very valuable area. So technically golden run territory. We came up with 3 candles which were also decreasing in momentum, and then what we can see over here, if I just clean this off for a second, is we pin barred right at the top where we kind of M-starred to it. So then when I go into the daily and I look at it a little bit closer, it's very interesting to see that we scooped again, and now with that indecision, it's kind of, it could potentially be making this decision to either play this range or to follow through. And with the DXY moving higher, it would make sense. So I'm going to be looking for something a little bit more deliberate. This doesn't necessarily have to be the pattern. We can see a few variations of what could happen, but it's just kind of just forecasting on what I'm going to be looking for. I think it could be a little bit more complex than this because we are in a run of momentum, as we can see, but there's huge upside potential, downside potential for this pair, and I just will be on the A game with it. But like I said, with the other yen pairs, they could equally just move higher, but because where we're positioned, we really need to be conscious of this. Now, how we did end on this was giving off that expanding as well, where in some senses I would say that this actually is a really good structure to have in this area, but because of where the higher time frame is presenting itself, I would want to see more of a clear indication of we're ready to go. And this may not be the large structure that I'm looking for. It could be something a little bit smaller. It could develop into something just like this, where we push down, we come back up, and then we create something like that and we sell. Right, that's completely fine as well. It's just there's a few variations of what I'm looking for. I'm just going to be very patient with this one, and I just want to see what happens. But more than likely, it's looking really nice for shorts, and then we could potentially be playing that range into this low, which I think equally actually has a really good risk reward if we can get positioned in that well. I wouldn't even mind taking a 40 pip stop loss on this, to be fair. And then to the low of this, you got around about 2.5. Around about here, you've got around about 3.8, and then to the low, you've got about 7%. So something as well to just bear in mind, there is really good downside potential on this if we do get clear structure. GBP US dollar, I think this is a no-brainer if you've been watching it. It's phenomenal looking at it from a weekly perspective. Have we done more than enough? Well, technically, yeah, because the first correction was over here, and then we've tapped in, we filled it, we created a wick which didn't completely fill it, and then we wicked through it, and now we've pushed down with momentum. This can just really start a sell-off to really come down to anywhere around about here, even lower, and then even if it does start coming back up, you've got into a really good position to manage. So what is nice about this is that even though we've kind of tapped in with a 1, 2, 3, which looks cleaner on the 4, you can see that we had the first correction to the left here, and we filled that. We filled it with a 1, 2, 3 structure, broke above, pushed in. I actually got an entry in here, but I took a break even, and then I opted in for New Zealand US dollar, which in the time I did regret a little bit, but it is what it is. You know, sometimes you have to pick between a few pairs, and you kind of just go with your intuition. And I think at this point my intuition still did form profitable, but the filtering between them wasn't the one. And I think Euro US dollar was stunning as well, but it is what it is. So now just looking at next continuation, I'm going to be looking for something in this area where we can then just be playing it into that low as a minimum, and then see if we follow through. And then the nice thing about this is if we do start moving to the downside, there's just a massive run to the downside here, which would be stunning. So I'm going to be looking at that closely next week. This is probably a prime one for me, where I will be paying a lot of attention towards GU, and then equally GBP Swiss with the other Swiss related pairs. As we mentioned, could we be in a clear run of momentum? Now what we did see was we pushed above, we pushed back in, clear deliberate price action just there. It wasn't the easiest to decipher, I'll be honest with you. It was a little bit more on the complex side of things, this pattern, but when you look at it from now, this perspective here, it makes a lot of sense. But in the moment, you know, it was very corrective and very difficult to decipher, but there was many lessons in there for a lot of people as well. And I think definitely worth studying this on how you could have taken advantage of that. But clearly what we did have is we had the clear follow through, and then when we had that, we had accumulation, which wasn't the cleanest, and then we followed through even further. So now we're trading down here. It's great because we can see that we are in the run of momentum. Can we get structure? And if we can, how can we capitalize on it? And then that's it really. GBP CAD. GBP CAD is also really, really nice, I'll be honest with you. Just because we're looking at the GB pairs to play short, I would be very, very interested to see if we can get continuation to continue lower. Now that daily close is phenomenal, absolutely stunning how we just pushed and closed at that point there. You can see it from a weekly perspective as well. We've basically had this as the point of sale. We tapped in, we came in correctively, and now we're rejecting now. On the monthly is not really over, so I wouldn't really worry about that too much, but from the weekly perspective, you can see that we've broken above, we've retraced 50% off that bullish candle, and then if we get another follow through the following week, oh my gosh, it's going to be absolutely stunning for a run to the downside here. So positioning ourselves in these areas would be phenomenal. A little bit more higher risk, yes, but because if we're in a run of momentum, we could probably see this just continue following through before we even get a clear continuation. So bear that in mind. It's worth looking at it on the one and just basically just referencing it. Even if this shaped up to look like this, where price just dropped off a little bit, came back up, did this, and then create something like that, I wouldn't be surprised if you had a pattern like that and you could take it. I would just say add a little bit of extra protection on that. If you're going to take it, put it here, and then probably just take it with like 27 or something, 25, just to be extra safe because of just getting tagged in and out. But more than likely, still got a phenomenal run in there. If you wanted to be aggressive, you could be aggressive around about 10. And then yeah, you'd basically be playing it into that low, and then you open up the floodgates to the downside. But it's looking absolutely stunning. So I think this week I'm just going to be more so just patient with a lot of these pairs and just see how they develop. There will be a lot of missed trades, and it's something that you have to accept because you're not going to trade all of them. More than likely you're just going to pick 1 or 2 or 3, so your filtering has to be really, really good this week. Going into the next one, GA, I'm also looking at a more complicated one. Actually, I'm thinking of just filtering this one out because it's just not the greatest one compared to the rest of them. Now I'm looking back on it, so I'm just going to filter this one out. But in terms of the GBP pairs falling to the downside, we could see GA perform with some really nice structures, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to put it in there, because when you look at it from a daily perspective, this is quite clear. We had this area here, we pushed, we came in correctively, we've tapped in, rejected, and now we're pushing to the downside. But when you go in and look at it on the lower time frames, you've really got to kind of decipher impulse, big correction, push, big correction, push, big correction, push, and then you know what is the real game plan. So I'm going to take that one out. And then we've got Euro USD. Likewise, I'm just looking for further continuations to the downside. Now we've had extreme momentum kick in, not from the most relevant area, but you can kind of see it as more, it filled the gap, pushed up aggressively, retraced, created continuation, and then we sold another deliberate continuation. I think this one was definitely one that a lot of people could have really just understood, and if you didn't take it, you could really study this and just see that something like this is completely valid. You just understand the risk in the territory you're taking it in, but more than likely you could get in there, you could even put in 10 pips, more than enough, and then you'd basically trade that. You'd run about 6.5, probably walk away with 5% as a minimum on that, but that's stunning in itself. But yeah, it's looking good. So I'm just going to wait for structure to formulate there. The nice thing about it is we actually have a clear run to the downside, especially with the DXY moving up. If we get a clear continuation there, we'll be good for the go. But we are in a run of momentum, so sometimes we don't tend to see those continuations so clear. Sometimes they just tend to be a little bit more messy and not so deliberate. So keep that in mind, but we are looking really, really good for shorts. If this for any reason starts pulling back up to the upside, which is also a possibility because we have been seeing price action like that, then something deliberate with clear continuation like this, you could take something like that. To be fair, you just have to understand that this is not your regular sequence. We're not really rejecting from anywhere significant. It's just it comes with a lot of risk. But right now we have clear deliberate price action coming from clear deliberate areas, backed by other pairs as well, which is really nice. And yeah, the main focus is there, so we know what we're looking for and we know how we want to be capitalizing on it. And just in terms of a risk reward, if we can get a risk entry, even with 18 pips, let's say, you know, you've got around about 6% into that low, and then if the DXY just enormously just starts to push and it gets super aggressive, then you know we could be opening up the floodgates a little bit further. But that's with an 18 pip stop loss. More than likely we'll be looking to get a more refined entry, and we're probably getting a little bit more tighter, but we'll have to wait and see. And then we have EuroCAD. Now EuroCAD is also looking really nice. I think this one is very self-explanatory. If I go to the weekly, you can see that we've tapped in correctively 1, 2, 3. We've then now got the momentum kick in, which is nice, and now we're just looking for a follow through, deliberate price action continuation. So looking to just play that one into these lows, see how it performs, and see if we can complete all the way. But this one is definitely going to be a prime watch one as well. It's really, really nice. And then EA, EA like GA. I think I would pick EA over GA. GA was just a variation of it because if they one shapes up, they usually both. But you can see in terms of sequence, this one has been absolutely stunning. There's been a huge amount of opportunity across the board, and now I'm just waiting for structure to develop. So, guys, that basically summarizes the whole entire Saturday market breakdown. I hope you found some value in this video. I know it was fairly fast, so if you didn't manage to actually catch a lot, definitely watch the video again because I was just covering through most of my thought process there. But all in all, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll catch you in tomorrow.